I'm talking to Sandy Tung, who is the director of a new film called Evan's Crime, and Evan's Crime will be playing at the St. Louis International Film Festival this Saturday, November 7th at 2:45 p.m. at the Tivoli Theater in St. Louis, of course. So, Sandy, you've had a nice history of filmmaking in St. Louis with a pair of family films that myself and a number of other mutual acquaintances have worked on when they were being filmed. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to reflect on those a little bit later. But for now, tell us about your new film, Evan's Crime.
Well, Evan's Crime is a film that I shot recently in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And it's about a young man, Evan White, who's a college student who gets himself caught in a perfect storm of bad luck where he is unjustly accused of selling and distributing cocaine and marijuana and is threatened with 28 years in jail. And it's kind of every young kid's worst nightmare of, smoking a little dope and then being caught in our judicial system and kind of what happens to him after that.
So one of the greatest strengths, I thought, of the movie was really the performances. So much of the film really rests on the shoulders of Douglas Smith, who's the lead. He plays Evan in the movie. How'd you come to find Douglas and cast him as the lead in Evan's Crime?
Well, I had casting directors in Los Angeles, and they were very high on Douglas. And Douglas, for those who don't know, actually starred for many years in a series on HBO called Big Love that also had Bill Paxton in it about a polygamous relationship. And he's also done, I know last year he did this film called Ouija for Universal, and he was also in the latest Terminator film. So he's a known quantity in Los Angeles, and I actually hadn't heard of him, and they just sent me his reel, and I found his actually I basically cast him off his reel because I found his performance very natural and unforced, and was trying and kind of the performance I was looking for in Evan's Crime. I mean, it's kind of shot as in an almost semi-documentary style, and I wanted to keep it really low-key and real as possible in terms of performance and look. So that's how we found him, and it actually turned out, luckily enough, that he actually lives now in New Orleans. So he was actually a local hire. I mean, he was there, and I flew out, and I met with him there, and we talked and talked about the script and his thoughts and my thoughts, and we basically agreed to do it after meeting.
Terrific. Also in the movie, David Arquette. He's got a very important role in the film. So, myself and others, we know him as Officer Dewey from the Scream series, as well as just kind of a general goofball persona. But Evan's Crime is a serious drama. So, that seems like a pretty big departure for Mr. Arquette. What was it like to work with him?
Well, David Arquette's, a very generous and nice man, and, I think he was attracted to the material and probably attracted to the role because it's not the usual kind of role he gets offered. And I actually know David Arquette because he read for me for a film that I did 25 years ago. And he was just a kid in high school, and he came in and was reading for this role about a film I did called Across the Tracks, and it was about two brothers who ran track. And he was really a very good actor, and I was seriously considering him, but he wasn't, I didn't think physically, he didn't look like a runner. So David Arquette, I ended up casting Brad Pitt. So there's that story.
But oddly enough, he looks like a politician, which he plays in this film, the district attorney. And, honestly, man, I sat here and I watched the movie, and I didn't know he was in it. I didn't look at the credits beforehand. And I just missed that fact for some reason. And I was like, man, that guy looks just like David Arquette, but, and then at the end, sure enough, you know. So, way to go. From a nuts and bolts standpoint, though, what's your process in terms of working with these actors? How, if I could be so bold, how do you get that level of performance out of them? Because again, this film, I think has just wonderful performances in it, all the way through.
Well, let me just say, I mean, directing is a craft and an art form, and my basic approach to actors and acting is that there's no one technique that works for every actor, and you have to talk to the actor and kind of understand and support what he's trying to do. I mean, I think as a director, my number one job is to make them feel comfortable in their space and comfortable in their performance so they don't feel in any way inhibited, that it just feels completely natural to them. And getting to that place is different for every actor. Some actors have a very rigorous training, and they like to go through the process of the training, and I'm there to support that, and I will rehearse with them in that way. Some actors have, you know, virtually no training, and it's just very intuitive, and they don't want to rehearse too much. So there's not one particular way that works for everybody. And I think it's, you know, my job is to figure out what will be most effective with each actor and try and enhance their performance in that way. And, of course, the other aspect of the directing is finally you're making a judgment, and they're responding to your notes about what is a performance and what isn't a performance and what is natural and what is real. And that's basically a very intuitive sense when you're looking at an actor and saying, this seems right, this seems real, and then, you know, directing them in that way. And I don't know what, you know, that's just, you know, life experience. I think there's no, you know, anything that I've done, I just look at it and say, I believe it or I don't believe it.
I'd like to talk about the tone of the movie. Evan's Crime, it's kind of unmissable, but I feel like, you know, don't get me wrong, fully justified edge to it in terms of, you know, raw language and subject matter. Being that we, at least we here in St. Louis and perhaps elsewhere, we tend to think of you as a director of family films.
Right.
But I do feel, you know, kind of an aside, it's important to let people know that this film, Evan's Crime, is not like those family films in terms of, you know, I would say this is probably a solid R-rated movie for language.
Right.
What was it that moved you? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's an adult film made for an adult audience. Is where
exactly.
Two other films we shot in St. Louis, Saving Shiloh and Alice Upside Down, were for a different audience. So that's the major reason. There's a different tonality.
Was it difficult to get to move from the family film arena into this arena, though? Considering, you know, the way people can get pigeonholed.
Well, not really. I mean, this is kind of where I started out, and the family film arena kind of came about in and of itself. And I love doing family films, and as a father of a not so young daughter anymore, you know, it was great to do films that she could appreciate and watch. And certainly that's a very real aspect of me. But on the other hand, in terms of my own craft and art, you know, if you ever see any of my independent stuff that I've done before, you know, I was doing family films, it was much like this. You know, I kind of like raw and edgy on a certain level. Terrific.
Well, besides being the director on Evan's Crime, you're also one of the writers and the producers, as well. So what's it like to wear that many hats on production?
Well, there's upsides and downsides. I mean, the upside is there are not a lot of conflicting discussions about how we're spending money and where things are going. You know, creative decisions are a lot easier when you're only basically answering to yourself. On the other hand, it's a tremendous amount of responsibility, and this film was really a challenge for me to do because it was done for a lot less money than I'm used to, and done on a schedule that was tighter than even the tightest schedule I was working on before. So as a producer, there were many times where I felt somewhat overwhelmed. I didn't know whether I was trying to bite off more than I could chew and that I could pull this off for the money I had. And so I was actually very grateful when we started shooting because I could, kind of disregard the producing end of it and just worry about the directing, which was, fun and, enjoyable.
To what extent would you say that Evan's Crime is, quote-unquote, a message movie? You talked about what it was about, the character Evan being arrested and by this DA who's out to, kind of string him up as an example.
Right.
What prompted you to tell this story?
Well, to answer directly your first question, which is, to what degree is it a message movie? Well, it is to some degree, but it deals with, as I think I slightly alluded to, it has a lot to do with this very current kind of problem that they're talking about in Washington, where there's been, really over-sentencing and zealous prosecution of nonviolent drug criminals to these really outrageous kind of prison terms, and it talks to federal mandatory minimums and non-violent drug offenders, and certainly that was an aspect of the original conception of the film, and why we, meaning myself and Dale Rosenblum, who is the other producer and writer, wanted to make it. However, me as a director, my basic tenet about filmmaking is filmmaking for me is about a person on an emotional journey and going through circumstances that are unusual and interesting. And so, as the writer, I certainly was aware of the quote message, but as a director, that wasn't relevant. What's relevant to me was identifying with this character, putting being emotionally involved and living this particular circumstance, which, none of us hopefully will ever live, but, we possibly could, and kind of experiencing that through his eyes.
And in that sense, it was my thought that Evan's Crime isn't so far removed from what you were doing at the core of your family films that we were talking about earlier, and I'd like to talk about a little bit more now.
Sure.
The family films, I said, they, in my opinion, those films, what made those films good was they didn't shy away from emotional reality, and they certainly didn't pander to their target audience like so many other family films do. I have 4 children, so, I'm grateful when a film like Shiloh, Saving Shiloh comes along. So anyway, I'm particularly interested to hear about how you came to direct the sequel to Shiloh. You did 2 Shiloh films, right?
Right, I did
second
the
one and
second
the third.
Honestly, it was just Dale Rosenblum, or Chip as I know him, was the original producer and director on the original Shiloh. And he is a gentleman who I've made, I think, 6 or 7 films with at this point. And when he was doing the sequel, he, for whatever reasons, didn't want to direct it, so he asked me. So it basically had to do with my own personal relationship with Chip, and he had worked with me, and he, respected me as a filmmaker, and, knew I would bring whatever I would bring to it, and so that's kind of how that happened.
in 2005, then, you
Uh-huh.
made the third Shiloh film, Saving Shiloh, and you made that one here in the St. Louis area. And, of
Mhm.
course, that film went on to win the Heartland Film Festival Truly Moving Picture Award out of Indianapolis. And then, and honestly, I'll tell you, it's my own kid's favorite of the bunch, regardless of the fact that I was the set decorator on that movie. They don't care about that. So I know it's 10 years on, but I'm curious as to how you recall the experience of doing Saving Shiloh here in St. Louis. And then a few years later, Alice Upside Down as well.
Well, I mean, specifically addressing shooting in St. Louis, I mean, it was a great experience for me. You know, we worked basically with a local crew. I mean, I think there were 2-3 people on each thing that we brought in from Los Angeles. But by and large, I'd say 80 or 90% of the crew was local. And it was just terrific, actually. I mean, there are a number of things that stuck out in my mind. It's just the quality of the people, my experience working with the people. And it has to do with a lot of things. But one of the things I attribute it to, because my grandparents are from the Midwest. They're from Michigan. And I used to visit there a lot when I was a kid. And there's a certain kind of directness and low-keyness about, you know, and not to stereotype people, but, you know, I will anyway, about working with people in Missouri. They're, you know, it's the show-me state. There's no BS involved. And and I just appreciate that. And it's, you know, it's very, in some ways, different from Los Angeles, where everyone is a expert game player and everyone has a superficial veneer of projecting success and competence, and, you know, it can get too much sometimes. So in that way, it was really refreshing for me to shoot in St. Louis, and the support of not only the crew but the whole city itself, because, you know, people were excited about us being there. I remember we shot a lot of Saving Shiloh in the town of Pacific, and, you know, before we even started shooting, they gave us a party, and they gave us the key to the city, and, you know, that everybody bent over backwards to help us. And once again, that's very different from a lot of experiences I've had in the past. And, you know, it's very hard to make a film, and on the other hand, you're also asking people to do things and go out of their way and, you know, make their lives a little more difficult by being there shooting, and that was never an issue in the area. Everyone was happy to cooperate, and we got all kinds of free help and support that was, you know, made the whole experience great.
Yeah, for me, I'd like to just kind of go out on this interview and share a few of my own memories here, if you don't mind. Working on Saving Shiloh and Alice Upside Down, for me, those were two of the most positive filmmaking experiences of my life, and I'm thrilled to hear that, you know, it was that way for you as well, that it was a positive experience. So I just wanted to say thanks to you, and, you know, you know,
yeah, and I just want to mention that, Jim, that, you know, in fact, one of the things that actually happened is with Heaven's Crime was originally supposed to be, I originally intended to shoot it in St. Louis again, but unfortunately the tax credit situation came about, and quite frankly, you know, the way filmmaking is done these days, I couldn't afford to make it, you know, unless I got some kind of tax credit. So, but I certainly was intending, you know, I had contacted the film office and had intended to shoot there, you know, precisely because I knew people, I knew quality people there, and I knew it would be a great experience. But, you know, that's, you know, I won't get into the question of whether people should or shouldn't have tax credits, but that was kind of the deciding factor in why I didn't come back, because I had every intention to.
Yeah, well, that's good to know, and you know, of course, things have slowed down here in St. Louis in the production standpoint, and so those of us who worked in those movies, we have to wear a lot of different hats, you know, to get by. So here's hoping that things change and that we get our tax credit back and we can have, you know, filmmakers like you come back. I know Saving Shiloh and Alice Upside Down, Yeah, Alice Upside Down, that one was kind of magical because the Cardinals were winning the World Series while that film was shooting, and in the movie was Ashley Eckstein, the wife of what turned out to be the MVP of the series, David Eckstein. And he would come and visit the set during the meals.
He played wiffle ball. Remember him playing wiffle ball?
Yeah, that was so
great.
cool. Yeah, I know. So it's like, of course you can't dial up that kind of providence when you're planning to make a film, but nonetheless, I just want to say thanks to you for giving a guy like me a chance to prove himself. I was given opportunities on your films that, were new and wonderful to try out. And I hope that coming back to St. Louis this weekend for Evan's Crime, that's a good time too.
I'm sure it will be, and here's hoping we have more of a future in production there soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So to recap here, Evan's Crime is going to play at the St. Louis International Film Festival Saturday afternoon at 2:45 p.m. November 7th at the Tivoli Theater, and tickets are available, and Sandy is going to be in attendance. Okay, thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.